Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to the Resilience Resourcing Podcast. This is a connection space where badass women share their real on their way to resilience. Each week, I have the pleasure of spotlighting women dominating in a diverse landscape of fields ranging from performance neurotraining to film and all in between. You will get to know the unique qualities these women each carry and how connecting with these empowering women's stories bring about camaraderie and in turn empower you towards your unique dreams and goals. So when we met, I was just kind of shocked how much we had in common. You basically have a very, obviously everybody's story is different, but similar story when it comes to traumatic brain injury and going through some things with church and kind of changing where you're at with your faith and all of that. When we connected first, we were talking about the fact that you had a concussion. You remembered even way back when you were in, I think you said you were a child, and was it a merry-go-round that you were on that you fell off of and hit your head?
Yeah. That was the first concussion that I remember, right?
Yeah.
So that one is my very first memory of a head injury. And I just remember, being on the merry-go-round and someone coming over to ask us if we wanted to go faster. And then I remember my legs up in the air and flying like superwomen. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in my bed and started puking and my head was pounding, and there was a big gap in time between the accident and waking up because it was daytime when we were at the park, and then when I woke up it was pitch black. So I don't know how long I was out, but
My gosh. And did you say you never actually went and got checked out after that? Oh
no,
my
we
gosh.
grow up with a lot of money, and so we didn't have insurance, so we really only went to the doctors if someone was profusely bleeding.
Yeah.
So
Well, and back then, I don't think they even understood a lot about concussions. It's only in the last 5 to 10 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, even when I had my traumatic brain injury when I was 6, they've come up, they've learned a lot more about concussions and how they affect the brain. Um, so I'm sure that people just didn't even have the knowledge. Obviously, I would have expected if you were knocked out and not conscious that you would have been at the doctor or hospital. But so how old were you when that happened?
probably around the same age, like 6 or 7.
Wow.
Young.
Wow. And so you kind of like moved forward, never really thought anything of it. And then um you said that later you were in another really serious car accident. Can you explain like what happened in that other accident, the really severe traumatic brain injury?
Yeah. So that about 15 years ago, I was in a car accident with my son. He was only one at the time. I was living in Utah at the time, and it was in the winter. The night before, it had rained and then it had frozen. And so there was black ice on the freeway. My car started to go out of control, and I tried to overcorrect and rolled my car a dozen times. Jaws of life had to cut me out and my son out. Uh, I was pinned into the car, and anyways, long story short, I had severe muscular trauma to my body, neck injury. My head had obviously been tossed here and there, and was in and out of consciousness, and resulted in a lot of injuries. I was temporarily paralyzed from the neck down.
Oh my gosh. So that's something that I don't think I remember learning much about. So you were paralyzed. Obviously, I'm guessing you were in a wheelchair. For how long were you unable to walk?
Um, I wish I would have kept a better journal so that I would have exact numbers. I don't recall exactly because I also had to have part of my heel removed because of a blood infection.
Oh,
And so that probably elongated the time, because I was able to move my legs once I did have to have my surgery. So I would say probably a few months,
Oh my
and
God.
then had to have the surgery. And so I was probably in the wheelchair for about a year,
Oh my
give or
gosh.
take.
Wow. Did that, like, going through that, did that give you a new appreciation for being able to walk and, use your legs and everything?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And even imagine, like, so you were paralyzed, from the neck down for a while, and then did you do a lot of physical or occupational therapy to gain your
Oh, yeah.
muscle? What was
And
that
then
like?
that continued even after I did regain mobility. Physical therapy continued for years after. I continued to have lots and lots of issues with, especially with my neck,
Mhm.
um, and back. Lots of chronic pain that didn't seem to really work. I really struggled with just the everyday moving would be painful. Sleep was affected a huge amount. I became an insomniac. I lost a bunch of weight. Life was really not good. I I hit a really big depression because everything that I was prior to the accident was completely different. My body was not my own anymore. I was not myself anymore. I felt completely different. My brain felt different. I mean,
Yeah,
even just the way that I thought, I couldn't articulate words the same. I I had worked on my master's degree prior to the accident, and not that I ever thought that I was really smart, but it just seemed to take longer to even get sentences out of my mouth than
yeah,
before. And I used to be able to retain information longer, and everything just seemed to be like my brain had been replaced with someone else's, and it was very frustrating. I
yeah.
felt like my body wasn't my own anymore, and I just felt like robbed,
Yeah.
like I've
I,
been pranked.
I mean, like, having gone through traumatic brain injury, I relate to you so much because, it's something that it's hard to even articulate to people, like what it feels like to uh have your brain not functioning like it used to. And I, you know, I was kind of shocked when I had my second brain injury. I went through it, as an older age, so I think I was more aware, but um you know, that depression thing is real once I mean, and the second concussion I had was nothing like your second concussion. Ours was almost flipped. Your first concussion was less severe, your second was more severe. My first was more severe, my second wasn't. But my second took me off my feet more than I thought it could because it was so little. And so, like, did you and I noticed when my second concussion that I like it brought up like my first concussion in a way, like it like re-traumatized me kind of. Is that do you I mean the second concussion for you was so much worse, and the body, just the whole physical aspect of everything that you had to go through. Um did it did you remember this? Did it bring up anything about having a first concussion? I've heard that sometimes, but I don't know because yours was less severe the first time, so you probably
Don't think
weren't.
it did. Like, honestly, I kind of forgot about that first concussion
Yeah,
until recently. Like, I just kind of blocked it out. I honestly don't have a ton of memories from my childhood. Like, I probably could write them all on like a two-page paper. And
yeah,
I don't know if that has anything to do with the concussion or from the car accident, but I have a very few select memories. And
yeah.
so when we were talking the other day and it kind of just like came up to me, I was like, oh yeah, I did have a concussion. I had completely just put it in a file in a cabinet in my brain and it was gone.
So
And
this literally just came up to you like when we were talking.
yeah,
Wow.
completely, yeah, forgotten about it.
So like I think my whole goal with this podcast, with all this stuff, is neuro wellness, like brain health, the importance of brain health. I mean, brain health is not only physical trauma, concussions, which we've both been through, but it's also emotional trauma. It's all of the above. I mean, everybody can have trauma on a spectrum from, the most minor thing to someone else to the most severe thing to someone else. and all kinds of people have been on this podcast sharing different aspects of trauma and overcoming adversity. And when we connected, I thought we were almost twins in some things, because you not only have we both had a few concussions and severe concussion, but also we had a similar background when it comes to church. And we came from different, I guess you would say, aspects of the Christian faith, but you we were really engulfed in the churches that we were a part of, and uh, the community and all of that. And I'm guessing that that support system was probably part of your life, a big part of your life when you went through this trauma. Can you recall any aspects of that community when you were going through that trauma? If they were supportive, if there was any help during that time that you remember?
Yeah, so I grew up a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or
Hmm.
LDS Mormons,
Yeah,
and they're definitely very community based. And
yeah,
so at the time of this accident, we were actually living in Utah. That's where I got my degrees. My husband's from Washington State, but we both went to school there. And yeah, people were great. My family's all LDS as well. And the support was huge, especially since I didn't have mobility.
hmm,
Um, Taking care of a 1 year old
yeah,
was really difficult. So my sister swept in and really took over as my son's like surrogate mother for several months. People brought meals. There was a meal train. There was a lot of support, and I was very grateful for that. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like when I think back of the stuff and the story, because I was knocked out, so I was in a coma for a week, and obviously I don't have memory of that. But I have, so many stories. I even remember even my first grade class brought me stuff at the hospital, but I do remember my family talking a lot about the support that they had with all of it, with the church. And you know, I I think when you go through trauma and you have a supportive network of people, it just makes a huge, huge difference. Like going through trauma on your own without having support, doctors and things like that, they can only go so far. Like they can give you treatment and they can tell you what to do, but when it comes to actually emotionally and physically working on that, like having a community is super significant. And that's something that I recognized when I did my research later in college was, oh, I've had this support network. Like, does that have anything to do with why I've been able to be resilient and overcome and, keep moving forward? And, I just noticed that there's different people that have a harder time overcoming things, or, you know, what is that what is the significance of having support when it comes to trauma? And I found in my research that having a supportive network was one of the biggest factors in resilience. And so I think it's really key that you recognize, like, oh, like I had this support network. So, you know, and you remember that as like a really positive thing for you, especially overcoming it and having a child or having any other aspect to deal with on top of the trauma. And then you said, you went through depression. That was something I very much relate to. It got way worse after my second concussion, and I didn't expect that. Didn't really make sense to me. And the insomnia, definitely recognize and understand that. Was there any aspect, when you look back at it, what were some of the things that you remember helping with like those side effects, the insomnia, the depression, were there certain resources that were useful to help you, get better?
Unfortunately, at that time, I didn't really have a great resource to help me with the emotional trauma that was happening.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's probably one of the reasons why it lasted as long as it did.
Yeah.
it's not that it was brushed under the table. I just think that a lack of knowledge prevented me from getting the help that I needed.
Yeah.
Um, I wasn't very, because I hadn't really suffered from depression before, I didn't really know what the resources were. And my family as well, like, I don't think they really understood how much I was suffering. And
Yeah.
so, and my husband as well, like, no one really knew how bad it was. And so it just kind of, everyone just kind of went with the flow and just kind of not pretended that everything was okay, but they just kind of kept going through their day to day. And I do feel like because that was never addressed and because I never really did get the help that I needed, that, you know, there's still trauma that I'm working, through today that
Yeah.
it was never addressed. Um, and it's unfortunate, right? Because the effects of it have now compounded over the years.
Mhm.
And um, and I do feel like in the last 15, even just the last 15 years, so many more resources are available than were available at that time. And
Yeah.
so I do have plenty of resources to help me now that I didn't
Yeah.
have then.
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like even in the last 10 years, people have started to, like we said, with brain research, people are realizing how multifaceted it is. Our brain, we're emotional, physical, spiritual, mental beings. Like, we're not just one. Is your brain is not just an organ that, functions outside of those things. And um so, we touched on the spiritual side of having like your faith and having your support network with that. Obviously, you were in the hospital, and getting the occupational therapy, physical things like that. And, uh, the emotional side, now that you have been working on it in the last, few years, more and more and more. And that's the thing. I think oftentimes people think that it's just a quick fix, like depression. Oh, you just take this medicine and you're 100% fine. Or, oh, you just go to therapy and then you're never suffer again. Like, that couldn't be further from the truth. Um, it is usually just like any other chronic kind of condition. It's health. Like, your mental health is never going to be 100%. Your physical health is never going to be 100%. As long as you're on this earth, like, you're going to have, just like you go to the doctor when you hurt yourself, or, you're never going to not have a cold again. You're never not going to have depression again. It's just the ways that you learn to deal with it, and therapy and, exercise, all the aspects that, what you're eating, all these things have a huge effect on that. Is there anything specific in the recent time that has helped you as you've kind of unloaded or kind of brought up the fact that it's, the depression and the emotional side to it and that aspect of everything?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the past trauma did resurface once I left the church. So that support system that I did have, even though it was like super helpful throughout the years, especially for like physical needs, right? It provided that those physical needs and like the meals and those tangible things, didn't always provide the emotional support that I needed. But I left the church almost 2 years ago. And after leaving the church and having that support system therefore removed, right? Um, all of that emotional trauma from the car accident almost resurfaced. I thought I had kind of worked through that, but it kind of resurfaced along with, you know, new emotional trauma. And I found myself in a new, I don't know, like a new arena that I hadn't
Yeah.
ever been to before. And it was at that time that I discovered coaching. Well, I discovered coaching a little bit earlier, but it was really then that I was like, okay, this is what I need in my life to work through this, because it opened up um, an avenue that I hadn't really discovered before, which was really learning the brain, learning how it works, and using that as a tool for myself
Hmm.
so that I could almost, walk hand in hand with my brain, because I felt like I was constantly in battle with my brain. Like we
Yeah.
were always at odds.
Yeah.
And understanding the biomechanics of it, how it works, and how we could actually come together and work in harmony through
Mhm.
coaching, is what has really helped me be the most successful in getting towards my working towards my emotional wellness goals and becoming more of who I want to be and um, where I want to be in my life.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. Like the I can relate again because I said we have very similar stories, trauma and then church. Um, the church trauma is a whole nother aspect because it's losing a community, that in and of itself, minus the faith and everything that that stood for, but the actual community that you have, it's almost like you're kind of in this. I'm gonna be careful and not say, some people would say cult, but like I'm just saying you're in this like vacuum where these other things kind of are not as obvious, or it's a distraction from like yourself. I think that for me, that's what it was. It was a distraction from myself. I was so focused on being part of this church, being part of this community, and there were so many activities and uh, things to be distracted by, and how I was supposed to serve others, and all these things that you disassociate from your own trauma, the own stuff. And so I can imagine that when you separate yourself from the community, like I did the same time frame about 2 3 years ago. You all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have it's me. Like I have to look at me and like what have I been missing with myself? So I mean, like I completely relate to that. And um just the fact that you see this, like the avenue with coaching, and like how it's bringing you in harmony with yourself.
I feel like because I was a part of the church my whole life, like it kind of it like guided me on what to think, how to act, how to dress, how to eat, how to parent, all of these things. It was like there was this guidebook and it told me everything that I needed to do. Not only that, but like it gave me all the answers as to like where we go after we die. And like everything was all nicely packaged in this little present. And then when I left the church, that was gone. And it was like,
Mhm.
oh, wait, how do I parent? What do I think? Who am I? Where do I go after I die? All of these big, huge questions now had this huge question mark in front of them. And for me, that was probably the hardest
Yeah,
because you just feel lost. You
yeah,
don't have a community to ask anymore. You really are on your own. I mean, you can do your own research and you can go to different churches, but that's when you like really have to step into yourself and really get to know yourself. And it's uncomfortable sometimes, especially like you said, when you've been a part of this community, you almost forget yourself. You forget who
yeah,
you are. You are just a part of that group. You've almost dissociated yourself. And it can be really uncomfortable, especially if you're like myself, who their whole lives, like my self talk, my self talk has always been really negative. And that has been kind of like my motivator. Not that that's a good motivator. And I just kind of assumed that that was normal and that that was okay and that that was the way it was.
yeah,
And that was really damaging. And it didn't really surface to me that that was really unhealthy. And even though sometimes it's promoted in certain religions, like, oh, well, that'll help you be righteous or it'll help you, um, avoid the temptations of whatever, instead of viewing it like that, like actually seeing yourself as someone with amazing wisdom and learning to trust that
mhm,
and to lean into yourself
mhm,
instead of relying on validation from the outside world, from the exterior, instead of always trying to find the answers from outside of yourself.
mhm,
That's for me has been a huge, awakening, a huge gift, if you
Yeah.
will.
Your
And
intuition.
yeah, and I want to give that to other women because I feel like we're robbed of that.
Yeah. It's totally true. I mean, like, it's so true. And I think, like you were part of LDS, I was part of the huge evangelical movement, everything that had to do with Christian evangelicalism. And it becomes something that is all consuming, and you, like you said, you're taught to not listen to your intuition. You're taught to do, and then when you're taught not to trust yourself, it's almost scary, because then when you need to trust yourself, I mean, like, for instance, this is kind of a sidetrack, but like, why do you think there's so many sexual abuse cases within the church as a global, issue? Is often because people are taught not to trust themselves. So if you have that intuition, like, this isn't a safe situation, this I don't feel comfortable with this person, you're taught to tell yourself, oh, you're just whatever, like, trust God, trust these people because they're of God, and I think that's just one aspect of why that's a really bad idea. And also, like, I've said this before, but like, I still have my faith. I still believe in Jesus. I still have a close relationship with him. It just doesn't look like the organized religion that Christianity has become in the political sense, or the um sense of what the churches have become in this world, like the business aspect of it all. But like, um I find it often at odds with what I understand, even in context of what I've studied in the Bible. Oftentimes it's him telling us that he created us with incredible intellect. That's what makes us different than animals, is the fact that we have a brain, a frontal lobe, ability to think and process information and decide. And so for some reason, and I'm bent on figuring this out sometime, why it's somehow gone backwards, and people are like, oh no, you're not supposed to listen to yourself. um it's not like those two should be at odds. It shouldn't be at odds that trusting God means not listening to yourself. Like, oftentimes God speaks to you and it's correct, and you should be listening. Like, so, yeah, that's such a good point.
Parenting plan to provide for them. And there were plenty of days like that. And I have to kind of step back down and open up the perspective again. And I have to unshame all of these beliefs that I have about myself, that I've formed through these thought patterns that I've, basically ingrained in my brain through repetition, that I can't do this without the church. I can't be a good parent unless my kids have other LDS friends. My kids won't have a successful life unless their friends are all LDS. I can't go to heaven unless X, Y, and Z, right? All of these thoughts that I've been fed over my life that have formed my belief system.